So, Carla, I think lots of our listeners are messaging in saying,
Sure.
isn't this the decision for the people of Greenland and Denmark? You may have those thoughts about how Greenland is run. America already has a base there. It has had historically a military presence, formerly a very strong military presence. There has been discussion about America potentially purchasing minerals or resources. Why is this language so aggressive from Donald Trump in the sense that we need to own Denmark? That's what a lot of my listeners are very confused about.
In this segment, we finally get to see Carla Sands properly challenged and held accountable for the repeated falsehoods and misleading narratives she continues to push on behalf of the Trump camp. I've been waiting for someone to actually confront this head on. I'll link the full interview in the description so you can watch it in context, but for now, I'm going to play a short portion of the exchange and step in along the way with my own analysis and commentary.
To it.
Well, President Trump doesn't want to own Denmark. Denmark is a country of almost 6 million people.
Greenland.
Okay, so Greenlanders have stated publicly and voted that they're going to go independent. They're going to do it in the 21st century. There's less than 60,000 people that live on a landmass that is 1/3 the size of the continental U.S. They can want to be independent. They can make their own laws, but they will never be able to defend themselves. And there are predators in the world like China, like Russia. We don't want them to fall into adversarial hands just off our northeast coast. It would be much worse than Cuba as a threat to the United States. So President Trump is looking at how do we secure the United States, but not just the U.S. It's for our allies in Europe and the UK as well.
Okay.
NATO is called North Atlantic. Greenland is the key to safe passage back and forth. And it's also important for missile warning for the West. And so Greenland must be secure. The U.S. can do it. Denmark cannot. And it's not our job to be mercenaries and help Denmark out with an asset they can't afford to own. So Greenlanders can be independent if they have a relationship with the U.S., like a COFA, like a free association agreement. They make their own laws, but they get investment from the U.S. and they get a security blanket that will make sure that they're protected. These are great people. They want to prosper.
But Carla, do they have a choice in this? And what you're saying, look, this is the deal that's done. This is what is going to happen. Do the people of Greenland have a choice in all of this?
Of course, Greenlanders have a voice in this, but here's the problem. Denmark has been gaslighting them. They now have like Stockholm syndrome because Denmark has been saying, oh, America is bad ever since they got a whiff that President Trump thought that they couldn't secure Greenland. So they've been filling the heads, the minds of these poor Greenlanders with all kinds of terrible stories where it's been Denmark that's been the predators on Greenlanders. They've kidnapped the kids, they've sterilized the women, they kept them living until the U.S. military got there in the mid-20th century, largely in Stone Age conditions because they wouldn't let them have modern conveniences like rifles or kerosene lanterns.
Right, Carla, let's bring Scott in. Let's get some reaction because you've set out your stall. It's good to hear the argument. We have a really clear argument. Sure. You're very close to Donald Trump. You've set out what's going through his mind.
I'm close to the situation too.
Yes,
nobody knows the situation like I do.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah, I think it's always important, Aisha, to start off with facts and cut through misinformation. And I hope it is misinformation and not disinformation. And to make the general point, the specifics is that no reason to insult Denmark here. Denmark, as part of NATO, has been responsible for Greenland's defense. Denmark has cooperated with the United States under a 1951 treaty on Greenland's defense, including giving the United States exclusive military access to bases which they continue to maintain in Greenland. They had 17 at the height of the Cold War. They still have one base there. The United States can expand that base at any point that they want to. So it is untrue that Denmark is unable to protect Greenland. In fact, Denmark has met the 2% target of GDP for NATO members in 2023. And is going to increase to 3.3%, having allocated $2.3 billion for Arctic defense.
Denmark. I just had to jump in and say Denmark can't.
Carla, hang on. You had your say. Let Scott have his say, and I'll come back to you, I promise. But let him have his say, Carla.
In fact, Denmark and the Nordic countries are far ahead of the United States in certain aspects of defense, such as icebreaker capacity. It is also untrue, whether it's misinformation or disinformation, that Russian and Chinese warships are around Greenland at this point and threatening it. There have been no recent threats by Russian or Chinese threats off the coast of Greenland, whereas there have been a number of threats of Russian and Chinese ships going into the U.S. economic zone off the coast of Alaska. But here's the fundamental point, and while this is all completely unnecessary, and why it is not motivated by any type of interest for Greenlanders or for Denmark or for NATO, that is, Denmark is not just simply solely protecting Greenland. That comes under NATO, which protects Greenland along with Denmark. And if the Trump administration genuinely had an interest over the defense of Greenland, they would be talking to NATO and consulting with NATO rather than trashing NATO.
Okay, Carla, come back to that.
I'm going to have to step away soon, but I will just say this. Denmark can't even afford to defend Denmark itself. They don't pass the NATO report card. They don't contribute what NATO.
That's wrong.
That's not true, Carla.
That's actually wrong.
Well, so I was the U.S. ambassador. I know about their capabilities. I know them intimately. I know their military. I know.
But
I know what they're able.
You just falsely
so listen,
said.
I
You
would
falsely
just say
said
this.
they aren't complying with
There is
NATO.
not any. I don't know of any European ally that can actually defend themselves without the U.S. government, the U.S. military backing them up. That's just a fact. I'm sorry. NATO is the United States military with some helpers. And we want our allies in Europe to actually be capable. They're not yet. And Greenland, there's only 3 countries that could even defend it.
Okay.
Well, 2, China and the US. Russia, maybe, but I'm just not sure. But they do have great capabilities in icebreakers and in the Arctic.
Carla, just before you go.
Honestly, the nerve on Carla Sands to sit there and casually reduce NATO to the US and a few helpers tells you everything you need to know about how unserious her argument really is. And then she goes even further, claiming she somehow has this deep personal understanding of Denmark, as if she's an authority on the country and its people. The problem is, even the Danes themselves completely rejected her when she was ambassador. Her approval rating there was practically non-existent, hovering around the low single digits. And it wasn't just public opinion. Senior Danish officials openly challenged her. Former ministers publicly corrected her after she spread false claims about Danish living standards, including the absurd suggestion that people cycle because they can't afford cars. They even sarcastically invited her to experience Danish cycling culture firsthand, pointing out that cycling is a deliberate choice tied to health, urban design, and quality of life, not poverty. So, for her to now posture as someone with special insight into Denmark is simply false. She didn't understand the country then, and she clearly doesn't now. What she's doing instead is exactly what we've seen repeatedly from figures tied to Donald Trump, leaning on misleading narratives and outright falsehoods to push a political agenda. And let's be honest, this isn't just misinformation, it's deliberate disinformation. Notice who originally introduced the constant scare stories about China and Russia hovering over Greenland. That didn't come from Greenland. It didn't come from Denmark. It came straight from Donald Trump. And normally, when he says things like this, no one challenges him. But in this exchange, that finally changed. Scott Lucas stepped in and directly dismantled the claims, explaining clearly that they weren't grounded in reality. The moment that happened, you could see the shift. Carla Sands became visibly unsettled. What started as a confident monologue quickly turned into a tense back and forth. Even the host, who had been questioning her earlier, had to point out that her claim about Denmark and Greenland being unable to defend themselves simply wasn't accurate. And that's the pattern every time. The MAGA crowd wants you to believe everyone else is lying. Governments, experts, allies, while insisting they alone are telling the truth. This clip shows exactly why that narrative collapses the moment facts are introduced. What stood out most to me is that, for once, she didn't get a free pass. Someone finally challenged her claims in real time and exposed them for what they were. That's why this exchange matters. I'd genuinely like to hear what you think about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this kind of breakdown is your thing, hit the like button and subscribe. I'll link the full interview below so you can watch it in context. This was only a segment. I'll catch you in the next one.